All right, George, I think we're gonna go ahead and just do an introduction just to say hi to everybody, and then we will have Mr. Smith get started. So welcome everyone. On behalf of the Chicago Engineers Foundation, I am so pleased to welcome all of you here to part 2 of this wonderful presentation, Black Engineers, Scientists, and Inventors in American History, that is being facilitated by the one and only Mr. George Smith. Right before we introduce George, I just want to, again, welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming. We are going to just briefly tell you a little bit about Chicago Engineers Foundation, a little bit about today's presentation, and then introduce Mr. Smith. So first of all, on behalf of CEF, again, I am Debbie Burrell, the Executive Director of the Chicago Engineers Foundation. Chicago Engineers Foundation is a student-centered organization. We are our mission is to encourage and inspire the next generation of engineers here in Chicago. How we do that is in a variety of ways, one being these wonderful presentations that we're able to do sometimes in person. Hopefully at one point we'll be able to do that again soon, for schools and different organizations here in the city. And we also, thanks to wonderful platforms like Zoom and Google Meet, we've been able to go virtual with our presentations. And so our engineers, our volunteers, have been all over the city of Chicago, both virtually and several months back in person, meeting with students from elementary through college age to talk about engineering careers on an annual basis during an academic year. We can impact up to 1,000 students. We're set to break that record this year thanks to our virtual platforms. And presentations like today, where we're able to meet with so many young people and educators and community leaders and talk about engineering in this wonderful perspective. The other programs that we have here at CEF is we do have a scholarship award program. That's our oldest program. It's over 50 years that we've been providing scholarship awards to students here in Chicago who are planning to become that next generation of engineers. Fun fact, Mr. George Smith is actually an alumni of our scholarship award program from just a few years ago, right, George? He received an award as a graduate of Lindblom High School. In addition to our outreach and scholarship awards, we also do career programming now that we've been doing for just a few years now. And we've been helping our scholarship award recipients with things like resume evaluations and mock interview sessions. We've been helping with internship placement, basically all the tools one might need as they are pursuing their college degree, but also getting ready for their professional engineering role. And so all three programs kind of work hand in hand. And for more information, we'll put up in our chat in just a little bit our website, which is chicagoengineersfoundation.org. And on that note, I want to jump right in and welcome Mr. Smith. And I'm going to introduce George Smith just briefly, and then he is going to enlighten all of us with an amazing presentation. As I said, part 2. We never quite get through it all. There's so many people to talk about. And so we are absolutely thrilled that Mr. Smith is back in here to talk to us about even more men and women that we all should know. So to tell you a little bit about our speaker today, Mr. George Smith, he's a Chicago native. He attended Wacker and Fernwood Elementary Schools, and he's a graduate of Lindblom High School. At Lindblom, Mr. Smith was a member of the Junior Engineers Technical Society. He served as the president of the Honor Society, and he earned the Scholastic S emblem. George Smith and his closest friends were accepted into the Purdue University School of Engineering, and in 1971, George Smith received one of the first awards presented by our founding organization, the Chicago Engineers Club, as I mentioned earlier. And CEF is truly honored to call George Smith an alum of our scholarship award program. While at Purdue, Mr. Smith studied electrical engineering. George Smith, part of a group at Purdue called the Chicago Six, were the first to benefit from an association created by upperclassmen Edward Barnett, Fred Cooper, and Arthur Bond, known as the Society of Black Engineers. From the start, the SBE mission was to help minority students adapt to the college environment, adjust to the academic rigors of engineering, and develop the professional skills required in the workplace. George Smith designed the group's logo, edited the newsletter, and served on the executive planning committee. The Chicago Six recognized the nationwide need for their society, and so in 1975, with the support of the leadership of Purdue University, Professor Arthur Bond, and corporate sponsors, they established the National Society of Black Engineers, which we know as NSBE. Mr. Smith led one of the 6 regional meetings at the first national conference, and 45 years later, George Smith is still actively involved in helping fulfill the NSBE mission. Since its inception, NSBE has grown from fewer than 200 founding conference attendees, representing 39 founding college chapters, to now 16,000 members and over 500 chapters worldwide. After earning an electrical engineering degree from Purdue, George Smith joined General Electric and in 1978 Hewlett-Packard. During his HP career, George won a number of awards, including the HP President's Club Award. This prestigious award was personally presented to him by the company's founders, Bill Hewitt and Dave Packard. In 1992, Mr. George Smith started a business processing consulting firm and authored 2 business improvement books published by the American Society of Quality. Mr. Smith retired in 2015, and today he is a very active volunteer with a number of organizations, including NSBE Junior, NSBE Professionals, Project Sincere, MOCA, which is Men of Color Connected for Higher Achievement, PTA Men of Brookdale, Calvary Christian Church, West Side Forward, and of course the Chicago Engineers Foundation, where he is a student outreach volunteer and a member of our Associate Council. And it is my unbelievable pleasure to welcome Mr. George Smith.
Thank you so much, Debbie, and thank you to everyone in the audience. I really enjoy any opportunity that I have to share some of this rich history of the Black scientists and engineers in American history. My motivation for collecting this type of information is so that I can share it with my grandson. Fortunately, he only lives 4 minutes away from us, and I've been able to follow his entire education day by day by day because I've been retired. And I was concerned when I saw the Black history curriculum and what was being studied. And my concern was that there wasn't enough in there about Black excellence, you know, the achievement of African Americans in our culture. It seemed that so much of it was about the struggle that I didn't want his little 6-year-old, 7-year-old brain to be preoccupied by that. So I started looking into some of the history myself, and I used my favorite research tool. Many of you are familiar with it, Google. So I dialed in African American inventors, and pretty early on, I came up with this list that you see in front of us. Any of you could dial this up on your Google platform just as easily as I did. What I discovered here was that the Ohio State University libraries had put together a list of as many as 500 African American patent holders, dating all the way back from 1821 to, at the time this was published, 2006. And that really astounded me, not only the number of them, but also how productive many of these inventors were and still are. And so I started sharing this information with my grandson during Black History Month, and then that continued on to Black History Quarter and Black History Summer and Black History Year. And you know, literally to this point, almost every day I read a one-page biography about a Black inventor, so that I want him to know that there really are no limits on what his potential is. I want him to know that you know, the movies like the Black Panther that were fictional, you know, make people think that we haven't achieved these things yet. When in fact, if you recall the movie Hidden Figures, there's a great deal that that we have achieved that no one knows about. And I personally felt robbed not knowing about any of these things before I went off to college. I never met an engineer, much less a Black engineer. I never met any engineer. I talked with my classmates that were leaving high school with me, headed to Purdue, and none of them had ever met an engineer either. So it was a totally new experience. And I didn't want this generation to grow up without that knowledge. And so, since it's not available in the curriculum in school, I started talking about it in the classrooms that I was invited into. And thanks to Ms. Debbie Burrell, I've been invited to speak with you about this today. So shortly after I discovered this list through my Google research platform, I also discovered that there is a National Inventors Hall of Fame. This Hall of Fame was established in the early 70s. First guy to go in there was Thomas Edison. Shortly thereafter, Alexander Graham Bell, the light bulb and the telephone. Wonderful examples. In fact, as I think about my childhood, when I was watching the movie about Thomas Edison, I was a very youngster at the time, and I actually thought I was watching Thomas Edison. Okay, I mean, to me, Spencer Tracy, the actor who played Thomas Edison, was Thomas Edison, and and I was totally just awed by all of the inventions that he had been able to create through his own ingenuity and as well as through the research laboratory that he set up. One note about Thomas Edison, yes, he was a prolific inventor, but in my opinion, the greatest contribution that he gave to us is the research laboratory. He went out and hired scientists and engineers and gave them charters and tasks and directed them to invent all these great pieces of technology that we find commonplace today. So anyway, this is part two. Some of the inventors from the 19th century were covered in part one, and now we'll be talking about more modern day inventors. The thing that I want you to realize about the National Inventors Hall of Fame is that it is the most distinguished award. It's the most distinguished club that an American patent holder can belong to. And so the only way that you can get in here is if they deem, the judging panel deems, that your invention was so significant that it contributed mightily to the nation's welfare, and for that matter, mankind's welfare. I think it's really important for our students to understand that Black Americans have achieved at the highest level, been doing it for a couple hundred years. And so there's no reason to think that we cannot continue with that excellence. Speaking of excellence, I just love this quote by Dr. Charles Drew, medical doctor. He says, excellence of performance will transcend artificial barriers created by man. So, you know, to me, that means that when someone is out there suggesting you cannot do something or that this is beyond your reach, that is nonsense. Each man and woman decides what he or she wants to do and has the willpower to align him or herself to do that. Now, yes, there are barriers, and those barriers will in some cases limit how far we can go, but there should never be a limit on your dreams and your goals. Speaking of Charles Drew, so what did he do? Well, first of all, you can clearly see that he's in the National Inventors Hall of Fame because he is the inventor of the blood bank system. He is the gentleman who discovered that red blood cells and white blood cells can be separated from the liquid plasma. The liquid plasma can be dried out and preserved. Now, before he discovered this in his research, there was no such thing as a blood bank, no ability to perform blood transfusions, because the blood that was harvested from people only lasted a few hours, or at best, a day or so. So that just wasn't uh, a practical opportunity. So what's interesting about Charles Drew is that he was educated as both a scientist, um, a biological scientist, as well as a medical doctor. He actually got his medical doctor training first. And he had an interesting set of obstacles. First of all, his invention was in 1938, so that ought to tell you the time frame in which he lived. And he was doing all these things before World War II. He was born near the beginning of the century. So what was really important about what he did is that he was able to save lives. And this was exhibited in World War II. United States didn't get into World War II until 1941, after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. But the British were in World War II before that, fighting off the Germans. And they had a lot of casualties, and they were losing many of their soldiers because the soldiers lost blood and they had no blood to replace it with. And so they discovered that Charles Drew had invented this process, and they asked him to come over there and help them. So he set up the first massive blood bank and blood transfusion operation over in England. And as a result, many, many thousands of soldiers' lives were saved. Now, his process is the same process that we use in medicine today. And so the number of lives that he's saved or prolonged because of the ability to transfuse blood is in the millions. And that's why he's in the National Inventors Hall of Fame. Before I leave him, I just think the backstories about these inventors are really incredible. What you don't know about, or you may not know about Charles Drew, is that he had many skills. He was an athlete. He actually went to college on an athletic scholarship. And he wasn't just a bench warmer. He was the top athlete in the entire school. He was the fastest sprinter on the track team, and he's listed as the best player on the football team. So, many of us think that students who are headed towards sports are just headed towards sports, and some students that are headed toward STEM are just headed towards STEM. I want to erase that notion completely. I want all of our athletes to get involved in STEM education, and I want all of our STEM students to be athletes. You can do both. Now, the National Inventors Hall of Fame has some 26 African American inventors in it. At this point in time, none of them are women. And that's a problem for me. I shouldn't say none of them are women. None of them are Black women, excuse me. And yet there are certainly some Black women who I believe have achieved the level of significant contribution through their inventions that they deserve to be in there. And I'm actually part of a team that has completed a nomination form for this lady you see on your screen, Dr. Patricia Bath. And if she does get into the 2021 class, and she'll be selected. They'll be selected at the end of near the end of this year. If she gets in that class, she will be the first African American woman ever inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. So now, let me make my case. So she went to medical school at Howard University, and she became an ophthalmologist at Columbia University. Now, her specialty became cataract surgery, and she invented the use of lasers for cataract removal surgery. Before this invention, the methods used to remove cataracts were somewhat crude. There was a manual slice, and there was an invention called phacoemulsification, which used ultrasound to, after the eye was penetrated, use ultrasound to soften up the cataract lens and remove it. So what she was able to do was use lasers, which were much more precise, and that laser was a device that resulted in much less pain and a much faster recovery. So this is why she has been submitted as a National Inventors Hall of Fame inductee. Now you can Google her name. She's been on the cover of Time magazine. She's been on Good Morning America. And there's also an exhibit in the Smithsonian Museum, all giving credit and applauding her invention of it was called the laser phaco probe. And beyond her invention, she had many firsts in her life. She was the first surgeon to work at, the first eye surgeon to work at UCLA's eye clinic. And just an incredible lady. She actually invented a methodology called community ophthalmology to make ophthalmology available for people in remote countries. And she had noticed that African Americans had suffered more severely from cataracts and more severely from blindness. And so she was able to set up community clinics that helped to improve the vision of African Americans in this country and also over in Africa. Once she started doing surgeries in Africa, she was able to cure people of blindness who had been blind for 40 years. So to me, that is worthy of the National Inventors Hall of Fame. We'll keep our fingers crossed for that decision. Here's another person, Dr. Percy Julian. And he is famous for his invention of cortisone. Cortisone is a medical treatment that is used for arthritis. He also invented treatments for glaucoma, and he just a wonderful set of accomplishments. Now, in the presentation that I gave in part one, many of the inventors were sort of self-taught, mechanically oriented. But in the 20th century, it became clear that education was needed to really make breakthroughs. So this gentleman was trained as a chemist, and he had the opportunity. He had the opportunity to work as the director of research for the Glidden Corporation. Glidden Corporation is one of the nation's largest paint manufacturers. And so he was the director of research for all the new paints that were being developed. He developed what was called a cold water paint. And many of you are familiar with the notion of a fire extinguisher. Well, this man is the inventor of fire extinguishing foam. So I think, it's important for not just the young Black kids, but also the young Black kids, the young kids from all nationalities that are part of our diverse network. It's important for our entire society to be aware of this excellence that has been achieved in the past. And I believe that students and teachers are more aware of this, then they'll see more potential in our young students. And the young students will see even more potential in themselves. So, we've been talking about medical advancements that are a result of the work of Black inventors. And that continues when you start thinking about how Black inventors have affected the food industry. Food is a potential source for poisoning if it's not preserved properly. And so we have pioneers that have been part of the food industry. This gentleman, Lloyd Hall, is considered a food chemistry pioneer. He invented what was called flash-dried salt crystals. And this helped to revolutionize the meat packing industry. He also invented what's called antioxidants that revolutionized the bread making, baking industry. And just terrific, terrific example of the contributions that have already been done over fortunately a long career that he had from 1932 to 1956. I was only 3 years old when he was done with his inventions. But he holds 31 patents. And so that ought to give you an idea. We've only had an opportunity to talk about a couple of the things that he did in his long career. Now, this is another person who impacted the food preservation industry. His name is Frederick McKinley Jones. And this is a gentleman who was self-taught. He was an automobile mechanic. And he was given a challenge by his employer to build a refrigeration unit for a truck so that the fresh food can be delivered, in further distances away. And he, in fact, was able to do that. And so his refrigeration model became installed on not only trucks, but boats, trains, and planes. So he has credit of being the person with the first cooling patent for a vehicle air conditioner. Now, one thing that's interesting that I'll share with you about this gentleman is that along with a partner, he started a company called Thermo King. And although he died in 1961, by the time Thermo King was sold in 1991, it was a $1 billion corporation. So, that is major impact. And that is the reason that he's in the National Inventors Hall of Fame. So, whereas the previous food preservatives changed the meat packing industry and the baking industry, we have a fellow here who changed the fresh food industry. And it changed the eating habits of Americans, and for that matter, people worldwide, because now they had fresh fruit available to them, fresh seafood available to them that wasn't available before. Now, this is an interesting gentleman as well, George Alcorn, Ph.D. We made a transition here into talking about someone who's involved in space exploration. He invented what's called an X-ray spectrometer. Now, my joke is that to just try to describe an X-ray spectrometer to you is above my pay grade. But think about it like this. We're all familiar with X-ray technology. If we have a broken bone, get an X-ray to see if how severe the break is. So flip that around. Instead of looking inside the body at your bone structure, flip it around and put an X-ray machine on a telescope and tune it up so that it can examine dark holes in space, so that it can, map out planets in another galaxy. That's essentially what this gentleman was able to invent with his genius. So much so that when we think about the most acclaimed inventor and scientist of all time, Albert Einstein, he's famous for his theory of relativity. Well, that actually, even though everyone agreed with it eventually, it hadn't been proven until 2019. And an X-ray spectrometer was used. Now, it wasn't a 1984 model, but it was an X-ray spectrometer that was finally capable of proving Einstein's theories. Well, not theories, but facts. So I just think that's really significant to understand how important this type of success and excellence is, and that it should be shared with our students. And he was, and which is not uncommon for many of these inventors, he was an advocate for STEM education. He actually set up a middle school STEM academy. And I'm pretty sure this was a Saturday academy and sort of an honor STEM program for students who really had enthusiasm and wanted to pursue this type of science. Now, we're still in space here. Again, I mentioned that I believe there are some Black women inventors who have done work that is worthy of consideration for the National Inventors Hall of Fame. And since there's no one in there, then I get to decide who I want. And Valerie Thomas is one of those people. She's actually a mathematician and physicist. She was trained at Morgan State University, and she invented something called an illusion transmitter. Now, basically, the way I see it, it was a device that enabled a technology that enabled the transmission of 3D images. And what was interesting about her device is that she was walking through a museum and she saw a mirror exhibit. And then she started thinking about that mirror exhibit, how things, sometimes appeared different from they actually were. And so she started experimenting with mirrors, and she put two concave mirrors, juxtaposed two concave mirrors, and discovered that the image that was projected was a 3D image, and it looked like it was actually out in front of the screen upon which she was watching. So NASA and the medical industry picked up on this, and they're using this technology today. So just think about this. First of all, I'm of an age where I've had surgeries. I've had 6 surgeries, as a matter of fact. And some of those have been robotic surgeries, and some of those have been surgeries where they looked inside and they had an image, and they did the surgery based on the image they saw. Well, I want them to have a really good picture of whatever is inside me so that they can have the best chance of doing a great job fixing me up and getting me back out into the public. And that basically is an example of how this type of technology can and is being used to improve life for mankind and womankind. National Engineers Week for women too, right, Debbie? You can just smile. You don't have to speak. So that's why, hopefully Dr. Patricia Bath will be admitted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame, and our plan is to work on the nomination application for Valerie Thomas after that. Okay, so now let's talk about the personal computer. Now, computer technology is so widespread and common. Everyone who has a cell phone now has a computer. Well, there are a few people on this video, myself included, that remember a time before personal computers. In fact, I remember a time before the personal calculator, before the handheld calculator. When we first started engineering school, we were issued a slide rule to do all of our calculations. So that shows you how far back I go. So far, this is the first inventor who's actually younger than me. And he holds 3 of IBM's original 9 personal computer patents. So for the young people out there who may not have heard of IBM, because you've heard so much about Apple, IBM machines preceded the Apple machines. Apple grew and grew and grew and grew and basically took over that industry. But all business computers, all the way through the early 1980s, were purchased from IBM. So he was at the forefront of the computer industry. And what was interesting about his invention is that it enabled computers to connect with what's called peripherals. So believe it or not, once upon a time, there was not a laptop. The screen was not attached to the central processor. So it was a separate device. They call it a monitor. So he was able to connect these computers to monitors, to printers, and also to scanners. And for that reason, computer technology became a lot more useful and easier to work with. And that's why he is in the National Inventors Hall of Fame. He's an electrical engineer. He actually got his Ph.D. in electrical engineering from Stanford University. And like many of these other inventors, he has a lot of patents. So in this case, he has 20 patents, 20 or more patents. Now, I want to talk some more. We're still in the technology area. We went through medicine, we went through space exploration, started talking about technology, TV, and computer technology. This is a gentleman named Victor Lawrence. He's one of the more recent inductees into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. And he's inducted because of his methods of coding electrical signals. His methods are basically called digital signal processing. And his techniques improved what we now know as the modern internet. It made it high speed. It improved what's called the bandwidth of the internet. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, if you were sending signals, you could only send, 40, 50 years ago, you could only send sound. And then we reached the point where you could send pictures. And then we reached the point where you could send videos, and so just think about, especially the young people, how much you love to play games. Okay, without these advancements in the way signals are processed, there's no way that you'd be able to enjoy the games that you play with now. One thing about this gentleman that I should add is that he was not born in the United States. He was not educated in the United States, but he did the vast majority of his engineering and research and development work in the United States. He worked for Bell Laboratories, but he was actually from Ghana, in Africa, the country Ghana. And, he had a very, very poor single parent lifestyle that he was able to bring himself out of through education. And he actually studied engineering at the electrical engineering at the University of London. So here we have a man who literally is a citizen of the world, born in Africa, educated in Europe, and made his work contributions in the United States. His patents are United States Bell Laboratory patents. Just a wonderful example of what we can do. Now here's another gentleman talking about W. Lincoln Hawkins. And we've been talking about communications. We've been talking about telecommunications, sending signals. Well, those signals have to go down a wire or a cable. And so telecommunications was limited by the capacity of the cable wire that was used to transmit those signals. And this gentleman made some remarkable improvements in the materials used to cover wires and insulate wires to prevent electric shock. Before his invention, the coating on cables, telecommunication cables, were lead-based products, lead-based compounds. That included some plastic in there, but they were lead-based. So as you might imagine, these were heavy, and they were expensive, and they were brittle. And so he was able to find a way to invent a plastic material. That's what the polymers are. A plastic material to cover cables, plastic material that was durable enough that it could survive if it was planted in extreme temperatures, survive if it was planted, at the bottom of an ocean. Um, this type of technology is what enabled the real, the beginnings of the connections of people from nation to nation, not just state to state. So as a result, he is in the National Inventors Hall of Fame. And here's another example of a gentleman who worked for Bell Laboratories. Uh, just as an aside, Bell Laboratories was probably the most prestigious research laboratory in the United States, possibly in the world. And so, just to be considered talented enough to work for a company like that in a research and development capacity was amazing. He was surrounded by some of the finest scientists, and yet, he continued to stand out with his contributions, and that's why he's in the National Inventors Hall of Fame. Now, this next gentleman, Howard S. Jones, he invented something called conformal antennas. So, you're familiar with an antenna. That's what enables you to get radio signals out of the air, TV satellite signals out of the air. You have to have some type of antenna system to receive those signals. Well, he was working in the space industry, and he developed antennas for rockets and missiles. We're talking about, guided missiles, defense systems, spacecraft. And he made a tremendous improvement in the antennas that were attached to rockets and missiles and spacecraft. Because before his invention, the antennas were separate devices that kind of stuck out from the rocket. And they created what was called drag. It wasn't a smooth surface. It's very difficult to shoot a rocket straight up into the sky if it's not perfectly even, also known as symmetrical, around the entire surface of it. So he had the idea of coming up with an antenna that would actually conform to the shape of the rocket. And that is, that is his contribution. And it reduced the weight. His antennas reduced the weight of the rocket. It reduced the drag. It reduced the cost of the rocket. And this is why he was in the National Inventors Hall of Fame. I should also add that he has a U.S. Army background in his history, which is another thing that is not uncommon among these inventors. Howard S. Jones. Now, here's a gentleman, Emmett W. Chappelle. He invented technology called bioluminescence. And this is important because he discovered in his research that living organisms, bacteria, when exposed to certain chemicals, emit light. And so he was able to use this technology called bioluminescence to add chemicals and look at urine samples, look at blood samples, look at food. And depending upon the amount of light that that was emitted, then that could tell him that there were living bacteria inside of that urine, the blood samples, inside of food. And so he helped to revolutionize food safety. He also invented some other bioluminescent devices that enabled farmers to take a look at their crops and make decisions about um, uh, how much irrigation was needed, make decisions about, planting, just all of the decisions that are critical to the success of crops that feed us every day. He 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 helped to revolutionize and make that process more scientific. I'm going to talk about this gentleman here, and then I'm going to open up for questions. Um, I'll simply say that I do have a soft spot in my heart for anyone who worked for General Electric, because that was where I started my engineering career. But Marshall Jones was a mechanical engineer, and he invented and improved the ability to use lasers for material processing. So lasers to weld different materials together, lasers to cut materials, lasers to shape materials. I remember when we were kids, we were watching a James Bond movie, and they were using a laser it looks like the laser was going to split James Bond in half. See, that was all fictional at that time. But this is the gentleman who actually invented that type of technology. So with that, I hope I've shared a good little cross-section of these tremendous inventions that Black Americans have been responsible for. And I'd like to know if you have any questions about anything you've learned or anything you'd like to share.
George, would you like to unshare your screen so you can see everybody again?
Okay. First, thing I have to do is find my mouse.
Oh, there he is. Okay, so
there you are. Hello, everybody.
Yeah, I'm gonna figure out how to unmute everybody. Hang on. Okay.
So I see some familiar. I have classmates from Purdue out there: Brian Harris, Ken Eccles.
Okay, so everyone should have the opportunity now to unmute themselves. And so if you want to unmute yourself, and feel free to turn on your video for just a minute. Say hi to Mr. Smith, and as you do, of course, George, we have to thank you so very much for spending another afternoon with us, telling us about so many amazing men and women that I think many of us, I know I can speak for myself, did not know until you introduced us. And so thank you so much for doing that. We can, I guess with the number of guests we have, you're welcome to use the chat if you have a question. You're welcome to raise a hand if you have the hand function. We'd love to hear from everybody, and let us know what you think about today.
Debbie, it's Brian Harris. Can you hear me?
We can.
I don't have a question, but I just had to say that whenever I see a presentation by George, it always makes me smarter.
And I have to take a moment to introduce Mr. Harris. We have two NSBE co-founders here with us today, both Mr. George Smith and Mr. Brian Harris. That's two of our Chicago Six, and that is a really big treat for us. So thank you so much for being here, Mr. Harris.
My pleasure. George is muted.
Oh, how did I do that? Hold on.
Okay.
Okay.
I just want to say, this guy, we went to high school together and college together. And I wouldn't be here if he wasn't there. So that's all I want to say about that right now.
He gives me too much credit.
Well, as we're waiting for any questions that might be coming in or any comments, and again, feel free to use the chat or raise that emoji feature or whatever you'd like to do to ask a question of Mr. Smith. Again, we want to thank you so much, George, for being here today. This is part 2, and we still didn't quite get through. I know everybody that Mr. Smith wanted to tell us about, but we thank you so much for giving us the time for part 1 and today for part 2. As I mentioned at the top of the meeting, the slide deck, actually the whole presentation, will be available pretty soon on both our YouTube page and our website, and we'll send you all a quick email when that happens so that you can feel free to view this again at your leisure. We will be doing more of these. We are available, our engineers, Mr. Smith, and a wonderful array of volunteers who are all engineering professionals who give their time to visit with students, visit with community organizations, visit with schools, and talk about engineering. And so you're more than welcome to visit our website, which I will write in here, and that's chicagoengineersfoundation.org, to schedule a time for an engineer to visit with your classroom of students or with your group. And we do have a question here from Melanie, actually 2 questions. She wants to know, how long did it take to compile all the information, and are there any efforts to track down current inventors, Mr. Smith?
Okay, well, so first of all, I have to say that I started this probably when my grandson was in 2nd grade, and he's been promoted to 5th grade now. So we're looking at least 3 years. But when I look at the copyright date that I had on my slides, I saw 2016. So as far back as 2016, I had been working on this. And, you know, just one by one, I was just, you know, really amazed by each of these inventors and always asking myself, why didn't I know this? Why didn't I know this? And just wanting to share it with others, because I don't want other people to, you know, reach that point without, because I think it's motivating. I think it's inspiring. You know, I'm 67 years old, and it's inspiring me to right now. And my wife says, inspiring you to do what? Well, it's inspiring me to be on this call right now. This is, you know, I'm retired, so I can be doing anything, and this is what I want to do right now. So thank you for, you know, for being here.
I'd like to say thank you, George, for the detailed research and development of the presentations. These 13 astounding individuals you introduced us to today, in addition to the last session, I just look at them, and what I feel now is every day when I go back to work in September teaching a class, I'm pretty much going to introduce one inventor or 2 per week and go through the details and actually post the pictures of the inventors themselves and examples of the products that they've impacted in our lifetimes. And I think that's going to be a big benefit to students and or anyone that stops by my computer lab to understand and really grasp the significance of information that they've probably never read before. Okay, I mean, they've probably heard of 1 or 2 of the inventors that you've introduced in these last 2 sessions, but not the total quantity and the depth of their knowledge. So I really appreciate being able to participate in this session, and I really appreciate your work, George.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, I want school, science and technology, to be more interesting to our kids. You know, to me, it was just work I had to get done so I could go out and play basketball. But I just imagine a day, Kenny, when a kid can go into a classroom and say, today we're going to study all the math and science associated with the work of Mark Dean, who holds 3 patents on the invention of the personal computer. So that, you know, the math and science is actually relevant to something that they can see, hear, feel, and maybe even taste.
And George, we have another question. This is from Erin. Erin is a geotechnical engineer. She, by the way, said to me privately that she has used an X-ray spectrometer. So how cool is that? That we now know where that came from. And so Erin's question is—
that is very cool.
Right? She wants to know if there are any trends or patterns that you observed in the process of looking or learning about these individuals. Any keys to success or something similar? So any trends?
Okay, so the last time I did this, I talked about David Crosthwaite. He was the inventor of the modern, I shouldn't say the modern, but he was the inventor of heating and ventilation and air conditioning. And I had the opportunity on a visit to Purdue to meet a man who was mentored by David Crosthwaite. Now, David Crosthwaite, you know, he graduated from Purdue at the age of 15 in 1913. And so just think about the obstacles he had to have faced to have been able to do that. Well, so I had a chance to sit next to a guy who was mentored by David Crosthwaite, you know, and so I'm asking him, what did he tell you? What did he tell you? I mean, I was like a kid meeting someone who knew Babe Ruth or someone who knew Hank Aaron, you know. But so what he told me is that David Crosthwaite told him, you have to block out all the noise. You have to block out everything. People who are this successful have laser focus on their goals. And I think that's the common thread. I mean, just think about, you know, just the everyday danger that African Americans had to live through, you know, 100 years ago. These inventions go back all the way to these patents go back to 1821. That's not the beginning of the inventions, by the way. That's just the beginning of the patents, okay? So we're talking about 200 years for that matter. So it really, that's what it amounts to. And I just think that to a certain extent, we all become what we think about. And this is one of the things that I tell students when I'm in the classroom. You know, I'll be there with a 3rd grade classroom, and I'll tell everybody in the classroom, I know what you're going to be when you grow up. And they say, no, you don't. Yes, I do. Not only that, I said, I know what your teacher's going to do when she retires. And, you know, everyone's, you know, they're just going crazy when I'm doing that. And I said, look, you are going to become whatever you think about. So if you want to be an engineer, think about what I'm telling you today.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, George. We cannot thank you enough. And thanks to all of you. Today, just like for part 1, we brought together young people, elementary through college age students. We brought together professionals in the engineering field, educators, community leaders, to hear about these amazing men and women. And thank you so much, George, for making that happen for all of us. Again, Chicago Engineers Foundation, we are so thrilled that you were able to be with us. We hope that you'll stay tuned on our platforms, our social media platforms, for other upcoming presentations, or you're welcome to schedule your own with with us, and you can just check out our website, which is chicagoengineersfoundation.org, and we're more than happy to put together a presentation for your school or for your organization. We're going to keep going throughout the summer. The end of school does not stop us. Zoom gives us the power to bring this information to you at any point, and so definitely stay tuned or let us know what you'd like to see. We'd be more than happy to put these together at any point. Our volunteers are just itching to get out there and to talk to young people and to talk about really anyone anything that you ever might want to know about engineering. So please feel free to reach out at any point. And we thank you again so much for being here. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Thank you, Mr. Harris. Thank you to everyone for being here today.
Would it be possible to say one thing though?
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Andy Daniel, and I'm currently a Ph.D. student in biomedical engineering at Washington University in St. Louis. About 10 years ago, I got the opportunity to come to the United States to study at the Illinois Institute of Technology, and that was through the then executive director of NSBE's prerogative. So just wanted to say thank you both. Thank you to the founders for allowing somebody like me to get the opportunity to get here and get to the position I'm currently at.
That's phenomenal.
See, Andy, the reason we did that is because we knew you were coming.
That is phenomenal.
Speaking of IIT, there's so many inventors. I focus on the ones that are in the National Inventors Hall of Fame. But there's two names here that certainly deserve honorable mention. They're from Chicago, and they're from IIT, their education. One of them is a gentleman named Mark Hanna. Now, I've bought a book. I wonder if I have it here. Yeah, I bought a book from Kennedy Space Center. We went there on spring break 3 years ago. And it's a book about inventions. And it's a great pictorial. It's got diagrams and it describes all these different various inventions. But what's noteworthy is that in the back, they have a list of some of the most famous inventors of all time. So, I mean, just looking at the first page here, we have mathematician Charles Babbage. We have Leonardo da Vinci, okay? Leonardo da Vinci. There's a brother from Chicago, from IIT, who is listed here. Now, he's not in the National Inventors Hall of Fame, but he's listed here. So I'd like you to Google up Mark, M-A-R-C, Hanna, H-A-N-N-A-H. This gentleman was one of five founders of the company Silicon Graphics. And they developed the graphic technology that was used for the Nintendo games, used for the movies Jurassic Park, Terminator, okay? So he was the chief technology engineer, scientist who developed those types of computers. And that company grew to be over $1 billion before it was sliced up and bought up by all the Wall Street corporate people. Okay, so just think about that from the South Side of Chicago to that. Now that's an example. He's impacted the TV industry and the movie industry and the game industry. Another lady from IIT, raised here in Chicago, Andrea Berry. This lady is in the Sports Broadcasting Hall of Fame, okay? She was the senior vice president and groundbreaker who developed the field operations for the TV coverage of sporting events. So when you look at the technology that is, when you see the strike box in baseball, when you see the red zone, okay, the graphics for the red zone, that came from her. She was the head of that team. I mean, she basically defined the entire industry because she got into it at the very beginning of the industry. and she's in the Sports Broadcasting Hall of Fame. So, you know, there's just an unbelievable assortment of examples like this that you know make me proud. And every time I tell my grandson about them, they make him proud. And so, you know, Mr. Andy Daniel, Ph.D., biomedical engineering, you've already made me proud.
Foundation, and then we will go directly into introducing Mr. Smith, and George will commence with his presentation. So we do have more friends coming in right now. Make yourselves comfortable.